Okay. All right. I think we're recording. Hello, everyone. My name is Brendan McEwen. I'm a PhD student in Dr. Pruitt's lab, and I'm one of your TAs for this course. Today, I'll be talking about sociality in lizards, going a bit more in depth from Dr. Pruitt's overview slides of sociality in herpetofauna from Monday. I'm checking in from Westdale. Plenty of snow on the ground right now. Unfortunately, maybe a little bit less exciting than Tampa, so I won't have any domestic disputes out my window to entertain you with like Dr. Pruitt will, but hopefully you can stick through it with me today. So for an overview of what I'll be covering today, we'll discuss just how common sociality is in lizards and what forms that sociality takes for various species. We'll then take a bit of a deeper dive into a particular genus or group of lizards that has evolved some more advanced social traits as far as lizards go, and talk about how and why that might arise, what advantages that confers to them, and some of their observable traits that arose along the way. We'll finish up with a short forward view of what we can learn from these species and future directions of research that we can take to learn more about social evolution in lizards. To the right here, we see a general phylogeny of Squamata, the order of Reptilia that contains lizards, snakes, and other more obscure reptiles. Reptilian phylogeny is super weird, with a bunch of odd branching events grayed out in the center. That grayed out box includes snakes, as well as amphisbaenians, which are fascinating legless reptiles that resemble earthworms, but are beyond the scope of this course. The take home from this is that reptilian life is incredibly diverse and complex. All of the lizards below the gray zone are more closely related to snakes and those weird amphisbaenians than they are to the other lizards like geckos and skinks above the gray zone. But back to our question, how common is lizard sociality really? The short answer is not very, at least in comparison to some of the other taxa we've covered in this course, like social invertebrates or taxa we're innately familiar with, like primates. However, we have covered quite a wide variety of interaction contexts besides highly sophisticated social structures. And lizards actually have evolved some really cool examples of many of these, in addition to some more traditional social structures and traits exhibited by skinks in Australia, which belong to the family Synsoidea in the blue rectangle there at the top. So the first and lowest tier of sociality that we'll talk today is species that aren't particularly social at all, species that are solitary and territorial. This is the most frequently observed state of sociality in lizards. Most lizards establish territories based on resource distribution or access to mates, or usually both, and then defend those territories from rival neighbors and intruders. This serves as the foundation for evolving dynamics like the deer-enemy hypothesis or neighbor effects, which we learned about earlier this course in the context of salamanders. On the right, we see two black and white Argentinian tegus battling it out, likely for an increase in territory during the mating season in which males increase their aggression towards one another. Another example of this type of dynamic is seen in Anolis lizards, which is a genus of small to medium-sized lizard species widespread throughout the Americas and the islands of the Caribbean. Males of this genus establish and defend large territories that, hopefully, envelop one or even multiple smaller female territories. Males are highly aggressive towards other males. Oops, sorry about that. And maintain territory boundaries by frequent episodes of visual signaling to rivals. Males will flatten themselves laterally to make their physical profile appear larger, like we see on the left here, and extend a flap of brightly colored skin under their throats called a dewlap. These visual components are then augmented by performing a series of push-ups and head bobs and jaw snaps and whatnot to show their opponent just how energetic and physically dominant the focal lizard is. If these visual signals are not enough to quell the conflict, then the lizards will proceed to fight and lock jaws and wrestle around on the ground, where the more aggressive lizard will win and gain or retain the territory and the access to whatever resources or mates are within. For anoles, at least, this is very size dependent, as shown on the figure to the right, where on the y-axis we see a proxy for reproductive success in average number of females accessed per male. And on the x-axis, we see body size, the snout vent length, basically just from your snout to the end of your body, excluding tail length in millimeters. There appears to be a threshold effect where males radically increase their reproductive potential once they reach a snout vent length of around 6 centimeters. Another concept we covered earlier that appears in lizards is social hierarchies, in which individuals are assigned a certain standing within their local community based on a single or a collection of traits. We see this in lizards in the side blotched lizard, a small species commonly found in the southwestern United States. These lizards will engage in territory disputes similarly to anolis lizards, and form stable spatial hierarchies where an asymmetry in aggression between individuals establishes local roles of either dominance or subordination. A marker of dominance or subordination in many lizard species is the condition of an individual's tail, where individuals who have lost their tail lose much or all social standing, and their reproductive status suffers as well. When experimenters remove portions of the tails in these lizards, this asymmetry in aggression is almost completely eliminated in males, shown by the black circles in this figure here, that do most of the fighting. At stage 1 on the left, the dominant lizard is intact, and we see on the y-axis that the social disparity, so their measure of aggression asymmetry, basically they stage a contest and they count the number of aggressive gestures performed by the dominant individual versus the number of aggressive or subordinate gestures by the subordinate individual, and they subtract them to create a difference. So on the left, before the tails are detached, that is very high. So the hierarchy effect between those two individuals is strong. At stage 2, the dominant lizards have had their tails removed and either left detached as the treatment for tail loss or reattached with glue as a control for reduced body length. So they've still lost their tail, undergone the stress or the potential loss of status associated with that, but they've had the tail replaced so that visually they are still the same as they always were. In both cases, the treatment and the control, at time point 2, the social disparity drops very low. So basically, they're performing near the same amount of aggressive or subordinate gestures towards each other. So the two lizards really wouldn't be distinguished from one another anymore, and the roles of dominant versus subordinate are largely dissolved. In both the treatment and control, the previous dominant individual lowers their rate of aggression towards the previous subordinate, and vice versa. The subordinate increases their aggression towards the previously dominant individual. So this suggests that these side blotch lizard hierarchies are 1, adaptable to changing traits of individuals, and 2, more complex than simply being size assessment based, because we saw this effect in the size control treatment as well. Lizards of this species, and most lizard species really, lose their tails most frequently by dropping it during a predator encounter, which opens the possibility for a freak isolated incident in a totally non-social context to completely change the trajectory of an individual's life cycle if a reduced hierarchy position causes them to lose out on territory disputes and mating opportunities. Moving up a rung on the ladder of lizard sociality, we encounter aggregations or groupings between non-kin and kin individuals. We'll start with a non-kin example in which experimenters have found that Australian water dragons develop dyadic associations where individuals will hang out in pairs along the edges of various bodies of water. These pairings occur at closer proximity than this species tends to initiate aggressive territorial displays, and this suggests that these individuals have actually developed a tolerance for the other's presence. Over time, individuals demonstrate repeatable associations between themselves and a few other individuals, which suggests that they develop small assortments or kind of a friend list almost of individuals whose company they will seek out preferentially along the riverbanks that they inhabit. As we've discussed previous in this class, there's a distinct anti-predator benefit associated with being in close proximity to other individuals for vigilance effects. So these lizard pairs do indeed derive a benefit from these associations. More interestingly, to me at least, than repeated associations is the fact that these same lizards also demonstrate repeatable avoidances, where they will actively avoid being in close proximity to certain individuals at a greater frequency than just by random dispersal. One could speculate that maybe these individuals have had a negative interactions with these other individuals that they're avoiding before, and that the benefit of increased predator vigilance doesn't outweigh the stress of being around that individual or the chance for another negative interaction. In either case, these pair dynamics are evidence for these lizards maybe establishing affiliative and repellent individual recognition and perhaps memory of social information. Kin aggregations represent a significant step up from non-kin associations. Kin aggregations describe any scenario in which two or more related individuals elect to spend time in proximity with one another. These desert night lizards are a small, importantly viviparous, meaning live-bearing, and ironically named diurnal species from the deserts of North America that spend most of their lives hiding under and inside yucca bushes, these kind of dried, spiky, branched things that pop out of the ground. In the winter, these lizards aggregate into groups of 2 to 20 individuals under fallen logs and other more sizable refugia. Field studies combined with genetic analyses reveal that these groupings are usually kin-based, where individuals are grouping into these hibernacula, these group refuges during the winter, assortatively with family members in almost 80% of all observed individuals. So the black slice of this pie chart is where an individual is in association with an unrelated individual, and everything else represents some sort of kin association. Cross-fostering experiments with these lizards, where they take some lizards from one nest and put them with another nest and vice versa, show that these aggregations are indeed kin-dependent, where the non-kin fosters return to their foster hibernacula at far lower frequency than individuals grouped with their true kin. These group aggregations also confer clear fitness benefits, as lizards who aggregate in the winter with each other experience benefits to their body condition, their survival, and most importantly, the ever imperative reproductive success. These aggregations are only relevant in the winter and largely dissolve for the remainder of the year in March to April when the lizards emerge for the spring. But when winter rolls around again, they'll reform these aggregations. When it comes to questioning how these kin aggregations evolve, one extra piece to the puzzle is that, in addition to being viviparous, these lizards demonstrate delayed juvenile dispersal, which means that the juveniles, they mature in the nest before they leave to enter their habitat. So this means, in combination with their live-bearing nature, that these lizards begin their life with a far richer familial interaction history than most lizards do when they hatch alone from eggs and immediately disperse. So the next tier up in the sociality chain is pair bonding. When we hear of pair bonding, we usually think first of ourselves as humans and other primates, than animal counterparts, again, like primates, birds. But a few species of lizards do demonstrate this bonding behavior, the most notable of which is the sleepy lizard from Australia. Sleepy lizards are medium-sized, heavy-bodied skinks that form a pair bond with a member of the opposite sex during the spring mating season. Paired lizards will move throughout their habitat together in extremely close proximity, like under 30 centimeters apart. Like you can always find them with each other when they're paired. It's really consistent. They'll eat together. When they walk together, the male follows behind the female. He's kind of like watching her back, which is kind of cute if you want to think about it that way. And then when they feel the time is right, towards the end of the mating season, they mate. The total duration of this pairing is about 3 months, and after mating, the pair splits up. The female gives birth live again to 1 to 3 offspring, and although lab trials suggest that the mother can discriminate her offspring from unrelated juveniles, the mothers provide little to no direct parental care once the offspring are born. The most remarkable feature of this pair bonding system is that when the next spring rolls around again, they actually manage to find each other to repair. This is incredible because their habitats that they live in are these expansive, flat environments that are usually completely devoid of striking landmarks or other features to aid in navigation. So the fact that they find each other year after year is really impressive. And in long-term study populations, nearly 80% of females are seen mating with the same male in successive seasons, with some pair duos frequently exceeding 10 years, and the longest recorded standing pair duo is at 27 years. So literally, the entire span of my life, a pair of lizards has been monogamously bonded and reproducing with each other every year. So this is really cool. Having an episodic but consistently recurring pairing system in a long-lived animal is such an intriguing mechanism that this species has become a model for studying lizard mating systems, geographic dispersal, sexual selection, individual behavior stability, and much more. There are many theories for how this pairing dynamic may have evolved, with benefits of increased partner familiarity for the female, and increased ability to defend and retain a mate as the male, being a couple competing but not mutually exclusive explanations. This here is a picture of the late, great Mike Bull, a legendary Australian herpetologist who was a pioneer of lizard sociality research, in particular with these lizards, holding a sleepy lizard. All right, lastly, the pinnacle of sociality in lizards, at least that we've seen, is in species that form stable family groups. These family groups are different from the kin aggregations we mentioned previously with the night lizards in that these are stable year-round for the most part, as opposed to being episodic or seasonal. These nuclear family group dynamics are almost exclusively found in a group of, once again, Australian skinks called Egernia. 23 of the 30 described species in this group exhibit some sort of social aggregation with variation in the size of groups, group complexity, and group stability, both among and within species. Family units in Egernia can range from 2 to 3 individuals up to 20 plus in the case of Cunningham's skink, depending on the species, the time of year, and other environmental parameters. Most of the highly social species in Egernia share a few notable life history similarities, such as using environmentally limited refugia like rock crevasses and burrows, as we see here, as well as having that ever important delayed juvenile dispersal. So these highly social skinks have a few uniting life history traits that they share in common. These shared life history traits are important to us as scientists so that we can try to identify whether they are meaningful to the species' evolution of prosocial traits or whether they just exist by chance, maybe due to shared phylogeny. Like, did these traits allow them specifically to evolve sociality? Or rather, did these traits arise after they evolved to be more social? That's a big topic of discussion with these species currently with taxonomists. So first, these lizards tend to be very long-lived compared to size-matched non-social species. Leophilus witti, white skink that we see here, tends to live for over a decade, while similarly sized Anolis lizards that we saw before might live to be 2 or 3 years tops in the wild. We tend to view enhanced longevity as an advantageous trait, as it gives the individuals more time to grow and reproduce. There is a flip side to this, however, and it's that these lizards also tend to mature much more slowly. So our social Egernia, these white skinks here, tend to take 2 to 3 years before they're capable of reproducing in the wild. And that is crazy. For a group of animals like lizards that are seen as a delicious snack for basically everything in the world that is bigger than them, requiring a 3-year lead up time before you can even reproduce is incredibly slow. So keeping the comparison to Anolis lizards, these lizards basically endure an entire Anolis life cycle before they're even capable of reproducing. Further, once they do reproduce, these lizards have really small litters compared to egg clutches of similarly sized lizards. This isn't necessarily an indictment of sociality as much as it is a limitation of viviparity. Dr. Pruitt mentioned this in the overview lecture. If you're retaining your offspring inside you until they're fully developed, you're just not going to be able to fit as many of them inside compared to if you laid them out when they were eggs. This figure shows that the average litter size for these species increases with body size, but given the rate at which they have litters, these litter sizes are much smaller than size-matched egg-laying species would tend to output. All of the social lizards display delayed or completely eliminated juvenile dispersal. That is, instead of hatching and being ready to tackle the world from day one, the young stay with the parents for an extended periods of time. In other words, they're altricial. They are not fully equipped for survival on their own, or at least they fare far better with parents than they do all alone to start, much like humans in our all the way through our 20s, honestly. This is not an exhaustive list, but the last uniting feature I'll mention is that there's reduced sexual dimorphism in these lizards compared to most other species. On the left here, we have our sleepy lizards, where the male and female are near identical to the untrained eye. The bottom one is the male. You can see it has a slightly heavier build, even despite the perspective shifts between the two, and the bulkier skull, but really they're pretty indistinguishable. You can contrast that to the red-headed agama to the right, where it is clear as day who is who. It follows the traditional sexual selection rules of flashy males and more conservatively colored females. So what this tells us, or suggests at least, is that sexual selection in the sleepy lizard or these other social skinks might follow different rules than it does in the agama. And this is a really interesting concept for evolutionary biologists to test in experiments. So now we know some of the uniting features of sociality in these lizards. And frankly, not all of them seem all that adaptive. So why did these lizards evolve to form groups? The vast majority of lizard taxa get along just fine as solitary organisms, only interacting with other individuals to mate or fight over mates. So why isn't this good enough for all lizards? At least in the case of the Xanthusia night lizards, it seems to be predicated upon environmental stressors, namely the winter climate. High ranacula are present in many other species, like rattlesnakes, that we saw in the overview lecture, and it stands to reason that a cold-blooded organism would benefit from a mechanism that groups individuals together during the winter to conserve what extra shreds of internal temperature they can. For Egernia, the factors that favor sociality are myriad. First, the habitats that they live in favor the evolution of group living in that they're mostly obligate rock crevasse or burrow dwellers meaning that they rely on their refugia being provided for them, either by geological formation for the crevasses or through the activity of other animals by constructing and abandoning burrows. These lizards can't create their own rock crevasses, and they're poor diggers, so they rely on finding these refugia pre-made. Worse, these lizards have incredibly short legs relative to their body size and girth, meaning that they're slow and vulnerable moving throughout the habitat. This makes them even more dependent on having a sturdy refuge. Another challenge imposed on Egernia skinks is the high incidence of predation, as mentioned before, but even more so in the context of infanticide. Adult Egernia will frequently evade territories of other groups and kill their offspring while displaying no such aggression to their own. Parent Egernia in their own territories will actively defend their offspring and nests from invaders, and juveniles in groups with their parents are subjected to much fewer instances of aggression when a parent is present compared to when the parent is absent. This last point is kind of just a reminder again that these lizards are all viviparous, meaning that the lizards are live born by the mothers. This means that from the very first second of their life, the offspring are interacting with the parents and depending on them for protection, as opposed to other species that hatch on their own and enter the environment ready to face the world. This altricial state is accompanied by the delayed juvenile dispersal that's seen in Egernia and Xanthusia, and is regarded as a major evolutionary stepping stone for the emergence of sociality in really most taxa across Animalia. I know I have mentioned this in this lecture 3 times by now, but that's because if there's one thing I want you to take away from today, it's that the biggest foundational step for evolving sociality in lizards and many other animals appears to be sustained early interaction between parents and offspring, which both the life history traits and ecological challenges of Egernia have shaped them to have. We will wrap up today by talking about what cool research these lizards serve as a system for in the future. Because lizards have traditionally been viewed as non-social, sociality is relatively understudied in lizards compared to other taxa, and this leaves lots of room for us as researchers for new avenues of inquiry. The Egernia lizards that we've taken a look at today are what one might call transitionally social, in that they're more social than solitary, but they don't follow the same rules that we've seen established in birds or primates. So they represent a cool snapshot in the progression of evolving sociality that really is unique among vertebrates. So we can see that there's room in an evolutionary sense in both directions for these lizards to either become more social or to regress and become less social. So experimenters could manipulate environmental or group parameters to try to experimentally promote or discourage social selection in either direction. This would help us better understand how changes in environments might affect social or transitionally social organisms. Next, because the Egernia group of skinks represents a detailed phylogeny of roughly 30 species, they offer a great system for us to do comparative or phylogenetic studies where we can test for genetic, behavioral, neural, environmental correlates of sociality by comparing these traits in the more social Egernia species to less social species in the group. Another avenue that's currently being pursued by some really cool labs in Australia is testing for social intelligence in these lizards, evaluating whether evolving these social groups has been accompanied by changes in their cognition that allow them to deal with maybe denser information about individuals surrounding them, learning kin versus non-kin, and evaluating whether cultural transmission is occurring in these social groups and how impactful that might be for their success. Unfortunately, some of this research is actually super difficult to do. Many of the uniting traits we examined earlier, like the slow reproductive maturity and small litter size, interact to make studying selection forces in these species really time-consuming and almost logistically prohibitive. So I would argue that it is still worth pursuing these experiments. Our environments are shifting more rapidly than ever through both climate change and human land use. And as difficult as it is for us to study selection on these species, it's even more difficult for populations of these species to adaptively respond to abrupt changes in the environment through selection. They deserve our research attention and consideration to ensure that this unique example of vertebrate sociality is preserved throughout the future. That's all I have for today. Thank you for taking the time to view my guest lecture. And if you have any questions about this material, other course material, grad school research, or anything else really, please feel free to shoot me an email. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.